Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey there, welcome to episode 108 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Connie Sobczak, the co-founder of The Body Positive, which is an organization devoted to helping people make peace with food and their bodies. She co-founded it over 20 years ago, and they've been using the term body positive for more than 20 years. So I was really curious to talk with her about the term and how they came up with it and how she sees the evolution of body positivity and sort of the mainstreaming of body positivity today, and what its roots were and why health at every size and intuitive eating are so important to the mission of body positivity. So it's a really great conversation, and I love talking with Connie, so I can't wait to share that with you in just a minute. First, I want to share a couple of resources I really love that I know you'll love too. The first being my intuitive eating quick start guide, which I call my 7 simple strategies for finding peace and freedom with food. You can get that at christyharrison.com/strategies. And that's my free audio guide to getting started with intuitive eating and implementing 7 simple tips to really hit the ground running with the principles of intuitive eating and health at every size. So if you're just getting started, you're just, new to the podcast or these concepts, that's a really great place to go. And it's like an audio bonus. So basically it's a bonus episode of this podcast, a mini solo episode that you can only get by sending your email into christyharrison.com/strategies. If you fill in your email address there, we'll deliver the guide to you via email right away. You can also text the phone number 44222 with the word food psych, and that's all one word, FOODPSYCH. Text 44222 with the word food psych. Some people say it the other way around, like text the word food psych to 44222. And that always confuses me, but if that's the way that it makes sense to you, then text the word food psych to 44222. The second resource I want to share is my intuitive eating online course, which you can find at christyharrison.com/course. This is a deeper dive into intuitive eating. So like the 7 strategies are sort of a quick start guide. The online course is really the full shebang. It's 13 weeks, but you can actually take as long as you want. You get lifetime access to the material and really work through at your own pace to implement the principles of intuitive eating into your life with lots of support from me and your fellow course participants. So participants get access to an exclusive library of monthly Q&A podcasts that I do just for participants in the course. And they're up to like 2 hours long now. So I'm answering like 20, 25 questions per episode from people in the course, and that could be you. So if you want to have me answer your questions about intuitive eating and get 13 easy to follow modules with audio lectures, meditations, journal exercises, infographics, detailed notes, and access to a private Facebook group of other participants who are going through this intuitive eating journey too and can support you along the way, head over to christyharrison.com/course to sign up. That's christyharrison.com/course. And finally, speaking of communities, if you would like to be a part of a community for this podcast, fellow listeners from around the world, thousands of them on an intuitive eating and body acceptance and eating disorder recovery journey, just like you might be, head over to christyharrison.com/community, and it will redirect you to the Facebook group where you can request to join. That's christyharrison.com/community. It's a wonderful place. There's so much support and love there, and I feel very proud of and passionate about this group that we've created there. So it's a wonderful place to be. Come check it out if you could use some support on your journey, christyharrison.com/community. All right, without any further ado, let's go talk to Connie Sobczak. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
When I was growing up, especially when I was little, very little, I was what one would consider a picky, quote unquote, picky eater. My mom told me that I rarely wanted really any foods at all, except for like 2 things. And then I don't remember that part, but when I got older, I just remember really loving food, except for things like peas and lima beans.
Oh, yes.
I was usually forced to eat. But really, I didn't really think about food that much. I grew up with a mom who wasn't dieting herself. And so there wasn't really a lot of talk about food when we were little. When we got a little bit older, I have two older sisters. And my oldest sister, Stephanie, as a teenager, she put on quite a bit of weight. And she was also very tall. And at the dinner table, my father started making comments about her weight and about her food and saying, Stephanie, do you think you should eat that? And then she started baking things for us and then would sit there and watch us eat. So that was my real awakening around food when I was an adolescent. And it wasn't a good one at all. And at the same time, all of my friends in middle school were starting to diet. So the combination of the two really started causing me to fear food. So it was pretty tricky. And then Stephanie went to Weight Watchers when she was probably in her late teens, and she lost a whole bunch of weight. And as 95% of people do, as we know, she gained it back plus more. But I just remember when she came home with her little Weight Watchers scale and her skim milk and, just like this whole thing. And I just got into it with her. And I was a scrawny little thing. So both of my sisters are tall and I'm shorter. And I was called the runt in my family. But I just started dieting with my sister. And then all my friends were really restricting what they were eating. So I just jumped right into the whole dieting thing and decided that something was wrong with the size of my body, especially my legs and my butt. And so I thought that I needed to just start restricting in order to fit in.
That's interesting that it sounds like you didn't have any awareness of your body as being wrong or bad until you started dieting or until you were in this diet culture of other people who were dieting.
Exactly. I was just this really happy, feisty, strong little child. And when I was 9, we moved to a farm and we had horses. And so I rode my pony all over and we worked on the farm and we played. And this was in the late 60s and the early 70s. And so there was so much freedom. And we had this 2,800 acre park, and my mom would just send us off on our horses and we would take off all day and we'd take picnics and we'd eat. And we just had so much fun. So I remember my body as a young child as having just fun with it. And food was joy. And we just ate because it was good. And then there was that moment, when my sister hit puberty and then I hit puberty and then it started becoming, so it sort of as we developed into women, that's when it really got complex.
Yeah, that's such a common theme. We talk about that a lot on the podcast, that puberty is a time when, especially women get so vulnerable to diet culture.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
And it's so natural to gain weight at that time, like
we're supposed to.
We are supposed to. That's how the body develops. Yeah.
Right. That's what we're supposed to do. And what I struggle with looking at the whole picture of how girls are treated when they hit puberty is that there's something wrong and that this weight gain is a problem. And when you look at what is medically supposed to happen, or as a species, what we're doing is that girls are putting on fat and flesh in order to get ready to procreate, because as a species, that's really what's going on. But we have this whole intellectual system and cultural system that says we don't want this, which is great to allow children to be children longer. And yet the body is doing what it's supposed to do. And we have all these problems with the female body doing its thing.
Right. Yeah. The sort of policing of female bodies as they're intended to be starts really early and earlier these days.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I hear stories about babies. I mean, coming home, and the mom comes home and the baby's being told the baby's too fat, or moms are freaking out that their babies are too fat when they just have all that wonderful pudge and flesh and doing their thing.
Right. And they're supposed to, because that's what helps them stay safe and grow and be nourished. Yeah. So how did things develop from there then when you started dieting?
Not so well. From bad to worse. So 12 years old was when it kind of all started, and the awareness about hating my body. And then by 15, I was hanging out with girls who were really struggling with food. And I just remember the day that one of them taught me about bulimia. There was no word for it when we all had it. We just said, hey, look at what we're doing, and this is great. And it didn't really catch hold immediately, but it finally did. And then I discovered So after my sister put her weight back on after Weight Watchers, she also became bulimic. And so we discovered that we were both eating disordered together, and then really bonded over that, and bonded over our body hatred, and bonded over binging and purging together. And so it became just a really normalized part of my life, and normalized also with all of my friends. And that's the thing that I look back and see. There's some problems that there's so much awareness around it now that it's being taught in schools by like, don't do this, this is bad. And so teachers are teaching in all those horrid videos that are all oh my God, they scare me.
And it's like a how-to video almost for some kids. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So in my group and in my generation, we just all taught each other. So I became pretty severely bulimic and started at 15, and then by 18, it just really kicked in. So then I went away to college, and I was a transfer student to UC Berkeley, and I was planning to be an engineer, and I was like going to take on Silicon Valley. It was the early days of computer engineering, and I was so excited. And my eating disorder just went out of control. I was living on my own. I was scared. I had no support. And so I dropped out of school thinking something was wrong with my major. Went back, changed my major, dropped out again, did this several times. And then finally, it started to dawn on me that something was wrong with me and I needed some help. And so that was when I was 21. I finally just stepped out and said, I need to heal. I don't quite know what's wrong with me, but I need to heal. And so that was the beginning of my healing. And it didn't take long once I decided I had to get over the bulimia on my own. So by age of 22, I was done. But then at that soul searching place of what had happened to my life, and that was overwhelming.
Yeah. What did you do to get over the bulimia?
Well, the first thing I did was I broke up with a partner that had been really instrumental in my eating disorder, would poke my thighs and tell me to go run, that I was getting too soft. And just note that I was very, very small at this point and really in the height of my eating disorder. And yeah, so that was going on. So I left that partner, and then I started making new friends as well. And I was working in this really wonderful restaurant in Oakland, and it was an incredibly diverse group of people, ethnicity, age, gender. It was really amazing. And so I started hanging out with people that just really liked me and didn't talk to me about my body. They weren't obsessed with dieting. They weren't obsessed with weight loss. And so I just started really seeing that there was this other side to me and that it was worth fighting for. The main way I got the motivation to get over it was that I really got to a point where I felt suicidal. I know I wouldn't have done it, but I was having dreams about killing myself, and I was really having fantasies about not being on the planet. And I had these series of dreams, and then interesting situation that just kind of woke me up to that, and that freaked me out. And I realized I really want to live. And when I decided I wanted to live, I knew that I wanted to really live. And I think that spark of who I had been as a child kind of was still there, and it came roaring up and really helped me do the soul searching and the seeking out of the healing process. So it was very difficult. I was fortunate. One of my friends had a mother who was a therapist who was treating people with eating disorders. And I learned the word bulimia at that time from somebody else. And then, so I had the therapist sent me this packet of information, and inside of it was all about bulimia. And so I started learning more about eating disorders and understanding that I wasn't alone. And then I got to read this little pamphlet called Eat Without Fear. And it was written by, her name was Lindsay Hall at the time. Now she's Lindsay Cohn, and she ended up publishing my book.
Oh, wow.
I met her years later. So it's this tiny little pamphlet that later she turned into a book about healing from bulimia. And that really helped me. She had very specific tips on what to do at that scary point and when my anxiety was building, and I really practiced that. And then I had this really beautiful opportunity to go to Hawaii with my oldest sister, Stephanie. And I said, Stephanie, I'm not going to go with you if we're going to engage in our eating disorder, because I'm almost done and I really don't want to do it, and I won't go. And I said, I'm going to bring all this literature. We're going to read about it. We're going to have fun. And so we did. And we would eat and we would keep the food in. And then the next morning we would stand in front of the mirror and say, you look like you did yesterday. And she'd say, so do you. And so we had this beautiful mirroring process. And just being in Hawaii and the warmth and it was very healing. And I came home and that was it. I was done. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend my path for others. And I would say, go get treatment for sure. But I feel lucky that I made it through on my own. And I learned a lot in the process. So I learned how to be an intuitive eater when there was no field of intuitive eating. I taught myself, and I learned how to be an intuitive exerciser on my own. And so it's really influenced the work that I do, because that was 36 years ago, 35 years ago. So it's been a big part of the work that we do at the Body Positive, my healing.
And it's so interesting that there was no industry for it. There was no field of intuitive eating and intuitive exercise, or really even, I mean, it sounds like you got a little bit of eating disorder recovery help, but not, a formal treatment program or anything like that. But it's sort of, I mean, I always say like intuitive eating is the default mode. Like it's within all of us. At some point we were intuitive eaters, right? And
so
for some of us, it was buried very deep. But I think especially if you have any sort of memory of being an intuitive eater, that can be such a guiding light on the journey back to it.
Right. And one of the things that I look back at and see was growing up on our farm, and we had gardens, and my mom grew vegetables, and I was always out working in them, and I would just be eating vegetables off the vine, just raw. And we had fruit trees, and we would just go out and sit and eat food off the trees. I mean, it was really idyllic. And I think that as I became healed from my eating disorder, that body memory was in me of like, what I do when I'm teaching is I say, the way my process goes is, and especially at that point, what am I hungry for? I have no idea. How do I know? Well, let me think about what colors I'm hungry for. What are the textures that I want? And so I spend this whole time with the sensual process around really imagining what it would taste like to have that color or that texture. So like, red, I want something red. And I need crunchy. A red bell pepper. Now, how can I build an entire meal around that red pepper? Because that's something that I'm craving. And then realizing probably my body needs the nutrients that are in that red bell pepper, or it's winter and I need something really soft and warm and cozy, and because I'm cold, and I'm very attuned to the seasons. And so that's how I now figure out how to eat. And I know that so much of that came from those early memories of really when I was free.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that too, thinking about what's going to bring you pleasure and satisfaction.
Absolutely. Yeah, in my book and at our trainings, we do a whole piece around pleasure. And to me, that's the guide for how to live my life. And pleasure has such a bad rap in our culture that it's overindulgence and that it's being bad and that it's crossing the line.
Sinful. Yeah.
Right. And, you can only have pleasure if you've had your heart broken and then you binge on ice cream or something like that until you feel sick. And that's not pleasure. And so, but pleasure as a guide, I mean, that's what we as a species, that's how we survived, was to follow the foods and do the things that gave us pleasure, because it kept us following those things. So,
right.
So pleasure is very important.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's, sweetness, the sort of demonization of sugar these days has really been so problematic, because I think we're all hardwired to seek sweetness. That is something that signifies good, unspoiled, like nourishing food, right? In the wild,
Right. And it's so simple. I mean, the fact that we have to have this conversation is what makes me sad, because we should just be able to listen to our bodies and eat food. And it's gotten so messed up. And there's the fear around fat, and there's the fear around our bodies and sensuality. And so then that all plays into it, and it just messes everybody up. When I look at babies walking down the street, because I'm jumping ahead, but one of the reasons I started the Body Positive was to change the world for my little baby, who was a year old. I haven't finished the story about my sister. She dying from her eating disorder and complications from breast implants. And so when she died at the age of 36, my daughter was a year old. And I just couldn't let anything happen to Carmen. I didn't want her to ever experience what my sister and I did, and she didn't. So that's the plus side of it. But yeah, I mean, I see these little babies and they're on the street, and I just pray that their parents are body positive parents, or that they're not struggling with their own problems, or that they're not going to get those messages. And then it fuels me to continue our work to get our work out further in the world and reach as many people as we can. So
that's a huge driving force for me too, is being able to change generations to come and help prevent people from having to go through this, because I had my own food issues as well. I had an eating disorder, undiagnosed, and sort of recovered on my own ish, and then finally got help and therapy and really recovered. But, it was a long journey and robbed me of so much joy in my 20s, like, a time when I could have been kind of exploring adulthood and enjoying life a lot more. I was obsessed with counting calories and numbers and overexercising and binging, and it was not a fun time.
And that's the part about it that's just so painful. I mean, we do have to grieve the lost years. I feel the same way about my teen years and my early 20s. I mean, there's just so much loss. I feel loss and grief around my education. I did go back to school and I finished and got my degree, but I just lost the potential of what my brain could have done. And that's a piece of it. And then I got to watch my daughter go off to college with the freedom to not have to deal with that and to be able to focus on what she's doing with her life. And what I love, and the full circle of all of this, is that she's now writing a book for college students.
Oh, that's amazing.
About being body positive and why it's important and how to do it. And I'm so excited.
Wow, that's awesome.
It is. Yeah, she's 25, almost 26 now, and just this amazing human being who has not had the burdens of thinking anything's ever wrong with her. So, I mean, I love it. That's the freedom that we can offer to young people and any age. I mean, those of us who struggled, we do have to grieve, but no matter what age you get this, you have the rest of your life just to live.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's such an empowering place to be. Even people who are in their 60s and whatever. I've seen people who've lived so many decades with this stuff still end up recovering and feeling really free around food, and then having a great rest of their lives.
Yes. Our body positive groups, we train people to create groups in on school campuses and in their private practices and all over. And we had one school group where someone came and she was 60, and we got this email that was so beautiful about what she got from it, and just to have the rest of her life to be able to love the skin she's in and to eat and have pleasure. And it was really beautiful.
That's amazing. Yeah. So how did you get from making the decision to recover to start doing this work?
Yes, good question. It was an interesting journey. So my 20s, I spent really learning about myself. I feel like I had all that time to kind of make up time to see who I was and what was my soul and where had it gone. And so I got really angry in my early 20s. I felt like I was really fortunate to work after my eating disorder with a therapist named Kim Chernin, who wrote a book called The Obsession: Reflections on the Tyranny of Slenderness. And it was one of the early feminist books around women and bodies and food. And so I got really angry and just had that passion to especially help women heal their body image. So I did go back and get a degree in psychology, and I had planned on becoming a therapist. And in between graduating with my undergraduate degree and going to grad school, I started doing massage and body work. And it was a type that was really about emotional release work. And so I loved it. And I ended up realizing that my hands and the work I was doing to help people release the fears around their bodies from the touch. And so like really working it out of the cells was just this beautiful way and the right place for me to be in doing my healing work. And so I had a lot of clients who really transformed their relationships with their bodies and body image through non-judgmental touch. And it was really very powerful. And then there was this moment that I started really feeling like need a bigger audience. I can't just do one person at a time. And this thing was brewing inside of me. And that was all around the time that my sister died. And so that was the catalyst to say something has to change in the world, and this is too slow. And so I had the idea to create videos all in teen voices to start working with the teenage group, boys and girls, and to have those be available to teachers. So to plant seeds of a different way. So I had this idea to just really change the conversation. And then I was really fortunate and met Elizabeth Scott, who is a social worker who treats people who are struggling with eating disorders. And she's just this brilliant healer. And so we joined forces and we started our peer leadership training. And so we got some grant money way back when in the late 90s and started training high school students to be body positive leaders. And that it grew all from there. And then we made the videos and we had all these educational materials for schools. But the leadership program was really the powerful piece of it because those students were going out and reaching their peers and changing their peers' lives. And so from there, we then expanded to college students. And then we just kept building and building. And now we train professionals to use our work. We train high school and college students and staff at high schools and colleges, and also staff at middle schools. We train parents, really any activist who wants to take our materials and then go out in the world and do the work.
I love it. It's so important what you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm so curious about the name, first of all, like the body positive and the be body positive model, because that term is so mainstream now, right? There's this whole body positive movement has really kind of, jumped the shark in some ways.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating. I sort of watched it happen. I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Yeah, we have been the body positive since 1996. And so when people ask me, like, why do you have that name? I'm like, well, because I was looking for a name for my nonprofit organization. And I had this incredibly creative friend who was like, how about the body positive? And we had this whole wonderful conversation. She had been thinking of the body politic. And we had this whole thing with light and dark and shadow. And, because that's what the work is all about. It's bringing light to the shadows and, bringing it all out in the open. And I was like, yeah, that's powerful. And so that's how we got our name. And then I met Deb Burgard, who's a psychologist who was just right around that time starting groups on a college campus and doing some writing around fat acceptance. And she was calling her work body positive. So we met, this is pre-internet, mind you, and we said, yeah, we love each other. We're doing great work. Let's just keep the same name. And if people call you, then you tell them to call me. And if vice versa, having no idea that the internet was coming. And so then, it all started changing. And then I just noticed I guess it's been like 5 or 6, I don't know how many years now, but then I started noticing people using the name. And at first we're like, hey, that's our trademark name. And, then suddenly it was just so big that I would have an entire career trying to get people to use a different name for their work. So, but then we really got excited that people are understanding the term, and it's complex. I don't like everything that is named body positive, and it's hard because there's a lot of backlash about body positivity. And so describing who we are and what we do is really important, in that our work is inclusive of all people, because our work is about listening to the story of the individual. And we don't tell people how to live their lives, and we're not prescribing anything. We're giving people tools to take into their own lives and to have them then turn it into something that works for them. So we've created this framework, which is our Be Body Positive model. And being body positive, the other thing, I did an interview and someone was saying, but what about body neutrality? And isn't that better than body positivity? And part of me just gets frustrated and said with the piece around, like, my thing is, call it whatever you want. Just live your life as you and I've been talking about. Listen to your body and live in your unique body, whatever size that is, and eat beautiful foods if you and create access and help people have access where there isn't beautiful food, and become social activists and fight for all people to be able to love their bodies. And so So to me, seeing corporate, I mean, I was just at the grocery store and I had to cover up the magazine because there was Cosmopolitan saying, love your body or some body positivity thing. And, I just, it's so awful because, and then there was a Weight Watchers one and it's like, love your body, but it's all about when you weighed and the airbrushed images. And so it's frustrating actually, but here we are.
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. And I'm so curious to hear more about that because the concept of body neutrality, I think the way that body positivity has been co-opted by these corporations and media organizations that are they're still selling the thin ideal. They're still a part of diet culture, and yet they're calling themselves body positive, which is so confusing and really clouds the message that body positivity wants to put forth, and it seems very antithetical to what you're doing because I've read some of your work and I know that it's very rooted in feminism and it seems to have influences from health at every size and fat acceptance. So
it's all about that. We were part of the whole movement before health at every size was a name. So that's how long it's been around. Like I know all the founders of health at every size and we all work together as a group of people of all different sizes. And so we were all promoting the same message before there was, so that's the thing for me that's really interesting. Suddenly something becomes a thing. I just wrote a blog about this. It's like, rock climbing has become a thing and everybody's doing it in a certain way and they all have their numbers and their little things and they all do it a certain way. And I like to climb rocks and, it's like, and everything, I don't know, I get frustrated whenever anything becomes a thing, it takes away the power of it. And so we had a name of our organization and it's very powerful. And now there's this thing that everybody's arguing about. And I just feel like, just go live. Really put the names aside. We still need a name for our organization, but if everybody could just put the stuff aside and just really live their lives, I think that's what we're going for. Spend less time in the head thinking about it and actually be in the body and live it. I mean, body neutrality, I think, is a beautiful thing. I love that people are really working on acceptance. And for me, it's like, yes, that's a first step. That's great. And body positivity doesn't mean that I'm positive about my body or myself or my life all the time. I have dark moments, but it's, as I said earlier, it's bringing this light and shining it into the dark places and honoring they exist. And that's being body positive. We bring it out and we struggle and we suffer as human beings, but we're here with it together. And it's still a positive thing because we're living. I mean, we're alive and we're here and we're blessed to be here. So, and we connect with other people when we suffer and we look at what we can learn from that and we don't push it away. And so that's a fallacy that being body positive means that I'm going to be happy all the time. I'm not. And I'm a 56-year-old woman. My body's changing and I'm living in a culture that doesn't like my body because I'm an older woman. And so I have to do the work myself to transform culture around me, but also transform what beauty is to me each and every day as my body transforms every day. So for the rest of my life, if hopefully it's a long time. So to me, that's what body positivity is about. It's inclusive of all people, and there's no telling anybody what to do or how to live or what's right or wrong.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I'm so glad you shared that because I think there's this mistaken assumption that body positivity means you're all like Pollyanna, happy about your body every second of the day, which really is impossible in diet culture, right? It's not ever going to be that rosy. We're all, and like you said too, we're all changing. So we're all going to have to navigate these changes in our bodies over time if we're lucky, right? If we're lucky enough to have a body.
We're lucky, right? My sister is not lucky. And I think of that every day. I mean, she died when she's 36. And I know so many people who have lost loved ones because of hating their bodies. And so to me, being body positive is I have a body. That's a positive thing. It's pretty much simple as that. I am lucky to have a body because my body allows me to be on the planet Earth and be a human being and be alive. And when I don't have a body, then I'm not here anymore. So it's a positive thing to have a body, and it's a positive thing to love it even when it hurts and to love it even as it changes. And sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm like, because I'm changing and it's a trip to age. I mean, for those of, when you really start, like gets to a point where something every day, it's like, whoa, who's that? Oh, okay, that's new. That's cool. This continual process, like seeing my hands, I'm looking at them now. They're kind of turning into tree bark. And I love trees. And I'm looking at a tree out my window. And if I could put my hands on it, they would be one together. And I was attacked on the street verbally by a woman 3 years ago telling me my legs were ugly. I was wearing shorts, and she's
What?
driving by in her
Oh,
little van, and she has her window down. And I was in the median between several lanes of traffic trying to get across. And she slows down and she's like, shouldn't wear shorts like that with legs that look like yours.
oh,
Yeah. So,
horrible.
I have older lady legs, and I had been out hiking, and it was like I was still wearing my shorts. And so that was a trip, and it was a great experience. It was a really beautiful experience because I know what it feels like to be attacked, and I don't get called fat or awful names on the street for living in a fat body. And so, I just had this sense of like, this is what it feels like, but I'm lucky. It just, it happened once. Am I going to cover up my legs? No. And I feel like our culture is so harsh. And so, like, my niece, I remember her telling me, so from my sister who died, like every time she'd walk out the door, she would just get harassed completely about the size of her body. And she had chosen not to cover it up. And so she just got really harassed and ridiculed. And it was really hard. And it's just such a mean culture. But what are we going to do with that? That's where we come together. Yes, that's painful. And now we come together and we form these communities and we support one another. And we come back into ourselves and we pick ourselves up and see our beauty. And so, like, my legs are now the ripples on my favorite lake in the world in the afternoon when the wind's blowing and the sparkles from the light are shining off it like diamonds. So there would be no diamond sparkles without the ripples on the lake. And so when I feel like I hear that woman's voice in my head, and when I look at my legs and want to say they're ugly, I think of that, and I think of nature, and I think of the beauty of being connected to the earth, and then I change the way I see them.
I love that. I was just reading over Jess Baker's book, Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls, the other day. And she has a line in there about beauty versus prettiness. And it's like, fuck prettiness, but beauty
Right.
is something, being beautiful is something we all have. We all
Absolutely.
possess beauty as people, internally and externally. Like, our bodies are just inherently beautiful. And I really agree with that. Like, I think in our culture, we do have this thin ideal that's sort of implanted, and it's also a young ideal and a white ideal, and, this very narrow standard that the vast majority of people don't meet. But,
Exactly.
if we were to sort of look beyond that and look at, like, actually what's here, what is it to have a body? What's right in front of us? Like the lines in your hand or the wrinkles on your face or the ripples on your legs or whatever are like these beautiful objects. It's not, if we don't attach negative value to it or compare it to this ideal that's in our mind, it's just like this interesting thing, like, ooh, what's this? You can be curious about it and you can be reverent of it because these are our vehicles for getting around the world, And,
Yes. And there's so much beauty.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we all have a different one, right? And
Yeah.
we have a different one. We
Right.
get to have a different one. Yeah. I mean, I think I love your word curiosity. I think that's so important with all of this. And this idea that someone else gets to decide what beauty is, that's only if we let them. And one of the things I write about in my book, Embody, is it's not about changing what we see in our bodies, it's changing how we see. And so for me, so much of it has been about changing my vision, because being brainwashed as a human being, and especially when I was young and I let it all in, like, somebody's telling me what is beautiful and I'm trying to conform to that. And when I shift how I see, then I see beauty everywhere. And our fourth competency is declare your own authentic beauty. The competencies of our model, they're skills that people can develop and practice. And declare your own authentic beauty means I get to stand up and say, I have beauty, without it being conceited. It's just that when I acknowledge my beauty, starting with myself, and this is my definition, is starting with me, there's so much beauty in the world. It's everywhere. everybody has it, and every living being, and just looking around, there's so much light and color that we can see when we include ourselves in it. Elizabeth, my colleague, she talks about always, so like if we wake up in the morning and we search for flaws in our mirror, then we're going to spend our day searching for flaws in other people and seeing flaws everywhere. And when we wake up in the morning and we search for beauty in our own self, when we head out into the world, we see beauty all around us. And I just love that.
That's really a brilliant point, because we are programming our brains to look for negatives the more time we spend dissecting ourselves, criticizing ourselves. Like that's what gets reinforced, right? The neurons that fire together wire together, as they say.
Yes,
So,
yes, they do. Right. And so doing these actions, like I don't destroy property, but I really do. I mean, I just did it right before our call. I was at the grocery store. And it was hideous. And I'm just like, ah. So I had to cover this men's magazine, and I covered the other Cosmo, and there was something else. And I just find all the food magazines and the political magazines, and I just start covering things up because our brains are taking that in. And if we're not conscious of it, Susie Orbach has a great piece in her book, Bodies, about it. And like this whole thing about the amount of that we're taking in of the imagery and how damaging it is, because it's just constant and constant and constant. I mean, we're bombarded all the time. And so our poor little brains are just like, oh, that's beauty. That's beauty. Okay, okay, okay.
right.
So it takes conscious effort to shift and switch and to look at a person where we might not say that person gets to have beauty, and just spend time looking and seeing and letting our eyesight change. And so, as you said, the neurons are firing in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a practice. I think learning to see beauty differently is a practice, because we've been practicing unconsciously our whole lives the other way, seeing beauty only in a certain narrow form. So it's going to take some practice to get to this other way of seeing.
Absolutely, just like intuitive eating. So you become an intuitive eater, you become an intuitive exerciser, and you become an intuitive seer of beauty. I mean, really, that's what it is. It's allowing ourselves to practice, because that's what life is all about. And we don't grow or change unless we get it wrong, as quote unquote wrong. And my mom is great. She's always like, yeah, get it wrong, because then you'll learn something. Yeah, you did, you fell down. Yay. So for me, it's been really helpful in this process, especially since I started the Body Positive, of just really practice. Everything is a practice. My meditation practice, it's a practice. Each day doesn't go well and I have enlightenment every moment. It's like, oh God,
Right.
I was just obsessed with thoughts all for the entire time. Okay, I'm practicing.
Right. Yeah, that's, I think, the common misconception people have about meditation. Like anytime I recommend meditation to clients, it's like, they're like, oh, I've tried it and I'm so bad at it, or like, it's like, no, everybody's bad at it. It's okay. That's the human condition.
The Dalai Lama, I'm sure, has days where he can't concentrate.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's bad at it and nobody's bad at it, because actually it's just the art of noticing and sort of redirecting your attention again and again.
And for me, so much of it is just saying, I'm just going to sit here. And even though every part of me is screaming to like, get up and do, I'm going to sit through that. And I went to a meditation 7-day retreat when I was in my late 20s. And I'll never forget, I literally thought I was going to go crazy, especially the walking meditation where it's like 1 foot lifting. Okay, and that foot's moving to the front. Okay, and then the next one, I'm like, oh my God, I am not going to be able to do this. And then I had this moment of like, okay, just come back to now. And I was able to do it. And I think that that's what healing our food issues is all about. And when I'm talking with people who are still struggling, that when there's that moment of panic, you just sit in the discomfort and you wait, and the discomfort passes. And that's the most beautiful thing about meditation for me, is just to sit in discomfort and then see that it will go away. It will come back, but it will go away. And so to change our food habits, so much of it is about being uncomfortable and then breathing and then being like, okay, so this is a practice. Now, what did I learn? When I'm talking to people about food, I always say, what I try and do is like, what do I want? not what do I need, because still for me, need is associated with should, and should is associated with guilt and my eating disorder. So what do I want? And then like really taking that time, what do I want? Like, and thinking about all parts of me. So my taste buds, my brain, my belly, my cells, how tired am I? All of it. What do I want? What would feel right for me right now? And then getting as close as I can to that and honoring whatever circumstances are happening. And so telling people, like Elizabeth worked with women in a homeless shelter, and like, how do you get as close to what you want as you can? And had these beautiful stories of going back a year later, and the women were saying that that was the best thing that she taught them, was about listening to their bodies around food, where they have so little access to beautiful food. It was really amazing. And then afterwards, it's like, how do I feel? So I get as close as I can to what I want. And then I have an experience. And then how do I feel? And that's where the feedback loop comes in. And we can have time to really process and think, well, that went really well. And that didn't go so well in terms of how I feel. Okay, so what am I going to do next time when the situation comes up? And if I beat myself up, hence our third competency, which is cultivate self-love, we have to have this practice of building self-love so we can then forgive ourselves and be kind to ourselves when we don't get it right. So we can live through trial and error. How did that go? Oh, that was really sucky. Okay, what did I learn from it? I don't want to feel like that again. And it can be associated with movement or relationships or anything that we do. That felt horrible. Hey, little self of mine, I want to feel good next time. So let me log this in so I remember next time I have the same stimulus that I can maybe have a different response.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And it's really, I always say like intuitive eating, intuitive everything. Like you just kind of start with your relationship with food, but it really does branch out into movement, relationships, jobs,
yes,
life, just all kinds of, ways that you could organize your life. It starts to become a little clearer when something isn't working. That's the sort of through line in all of it, is like when you're living intuitively and tuning into your needs in all areas of life, it brings a sense of satisfaction. Maybe not like exquisite pleasure every time, but like a sense of like, like, okay, this feels right.
Yeah. Yeah. What's been fun for me is having raised my daughter as somebody who has been an intuitive eater since the beginning, and then watching and seeing how she makes decisions in every part of her life. And so with school path and with all these different things and choices around everything she does, I'm always saying, how do you feel in your body? And so we always come back to that. And she knows how to do this because she listens to how her body feels, and she'll kind of get that heaviness and weighted, or doesn't want to get out of bed, feels tired, when she's trying to move in a direction that doesn't feel right for her. And then as soon as she shifts into like, wait, let me think about that. That's not a right choice for me with whatever it is. Let me try this. And then she'll watch her energy shift and change. And the entire body is involved in the decision-making process. It's really fun. It's so
That's
fun.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious too, like other practices and ways that you helped her cultivate that intuition around food and everything in raising her.
Sure. A couple of things. One was when she was little, I taught her about food in a really fun way. And so it was just nutrition in terms of these are the things, these foods help you grow strong. She loved to climb trees. These ones make it easy for you to climb trees, and we would go through this all. And she had a really quite a limited palate when she was young. And so I would always, I chose to always have foods that I knew she would like to, instead of always trying to force her to eat what we ate. That was my choice. I don't say all parents have to do that. And I know a lot don't. And they wanted to, like, this is the meal, eat it or don't. That's fine. For me, I just decided that, like, just because my palate's expanded and I want these kinds of foods doesn't necessarily mean this little child wants that. And so I'll have something that's blander or whatever, like, there's always some Annie's macaroni and cheese, or there's a fried egg, or there's, certain things that she would eat. And then at the table, we had a thing, and one of my friends same woman who helped me pick the name for the body positive. We were in a mom's group together, and she had a whole thing around the no thank you bite. And so I would ask Carmen, like, does your body need something green? If I noticed she's only eating the brown foods or something, like all the carbohydrates on her plate, do your body need something green? I don't know. Well, let's try and see. So you can just take a no thank you bite. If see how it goes. And if you want more, you can have more. If you don't, that's okay. And so she would, like, we'll use broccoli for an example, because that was her favorite vegetable. So she'd take a bite of broccoli. And then some nights I would have to cook extra broccoli, because she would eat every bit of broccoli on the table, and mine, her dad's, and, everybody's, and we would cook more. And then other nights she would say, no, thanks. And it'd be like, great. Okay. And she could still have dessert, and she could have whatever she wanted, because she was learning how to listen to her own body. And then another one was, as she got older, and she was learning about nutrition, and she knew when she was in balance and not. Oh, and the other thing I did was, like, I would hold my arms out and I would sort of wave them up and down slightly. And I'd be like, okay, this is balance. And so they're kind of like, I'm doing this little waving thing. One's going higher. And then I'd say, and then Halloween comes. And then I would, like, tip all the way over. It's like, so now to get back in balance, we kind of eat a little more of those other foods, and we sort of move ourselves back into balance. And then something else comes and we get way out of balance. And so that was, as she was little, kind of showing her what it meant. Balance isn't something that's static, and knowing that children will get their needs met over a 28-day period of time. If you give them enough offerings, they will, and they haven't been messed up, they'll eat and get their nutritional needs met. So when she was a little bit older, she'd say, Mom, can I have dessert? And I'd say, I don't know, can you? And I loved it, because later on, when she was in high school, she'd come home sometimes and she's like, oh my God, I watch my friends that are restricted at home, and they just always have bags of candy on them, and they're chowing down candy.
Yeah.
Like, have intuitive eating in their house, Mom.
It's so true, right? Like, it's always the kids that don't have candy that end up really, really going for it.
Yeah, it was really sweet. And so then when she got to high school, they had an open campus at lunch, and I never worried about whether she was going to get her needs met or not. I mean, I knew that. And, some days they would go, and on a hot day, which is very rare in Berkeley in the springtime, they would have gelato and sit in the park. And then other days they would go and get, sandwiches in their school, even for kids who are on free lunch. I mean, they had this beautiful food at the school, because Berkeley has the creator of California cuisine in town.
Yes.
And so Alice Waters. And so we had really lovely food. So, but here's the thing that I don't like about all of that, was that a lot of that food movement to get good food in the schools was all based on obesity prevention, and doing air quotes around obesity as I'm saying it. So everybody knows I don't use the word, but this is what the system is doing. And so my thing is, like, why can't we just get beautiful foods to all people without having it be about weight? And I just, because it backfires and it's ridiculous. And that's a whole other conversation.
I completely agree with you on that. And it's, I've seen it sort of morph into this orthorexia territory for a lot of people. I actually used to work at the city Department of Health and I was a nutrition policy person. So I was like writing menus and stuff for schools and hospitals and daycares and stuff like that. And I also did some education at like farmers markets, where we had a program to bring in fruits and vegetables and stuff to low-income neighborhoods. And the grants for those programs, for those positions, were all funded by obesity research funding. So it was like, obesity prevention funding. So it all was under this umbrella of like concern about weight that was just so problematic, because at the core of these programs, it was so great to be bringing in different kinds of foods and fresher foods and more variety and just sort of better tasting stuff to people who didn't usually have access to that, and the menus that ended up, people ended up really liking the new menus. But it was also, there was this sort of overarching thing that was like, well, this is going to help people not be fat. That's the
right. And BMI is connected with it. Right.
Exactly. Which, BMI, like bullshit measurement indicator, like has nothing to do with reality.
And the thing is, like, somebody's weight might change, but somebody's might not. And then the whole public health system is saying that person is not healthy. it's going to backfire. I mean, it just backfires. And then there's no cultural competency involved in that either. I mean, I think that that's the other piece that's really frustrating to me is a lot of the public health work is being done in communities of color, and it's trying to assume that a body is going to look a certain way and that there's an ideal for a certain person. And we know the BMI isn't culturally competent either. And so that's I just get very angry.
You had a great discussion of that in your book, actually, in Embody, because you talked about why BMI is so flawed and why it sort of evolved initially as just a bell curve, right? It was initially developed just to measure the distribution of body sizes in a population, which happened to be like, what was it, 18th century France or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. And it was an astronomer who really was a statistician and loved the bell curve and wanted to just try, hey, let's try height and weight is really what it seems like. You know?
Right. And then that was a population of, European people too. So it sort of had a certain distribution, but different communities have different body sizes on average. And so it might look very different in a community of color.
Exactly. And then having MetLife pick it up as an indicator of how much they're going to charge someone for health insurance.
Right.
I mean, or life insurance. I guess it's life insurance. Yeah. And then their statisticians just pushed it into the whole world of public health. And it's so.
And now we know that it's been thoroughly debunked, right? Like there's research, just last year, there was a study that came out that people were calling the last nail in the coffin of BMI, because it showed that people were getting misclassified as being unhealthy because of their body size, or misclassified as being healthy because they fit into the quote unquote normal part of the curve. And in fact, they were having all these metabolic abnormalities and weren't quote unquote healthy. So.
Right. And then there's so much money behind it. So people are going to keep pushing it. I mean, I can't wait for you to read my daughter's book, because she does the most beautiful job of pulling all of this apart. And it's in such an incredible way that I don't see how anybody could say, but what about this? And wait, what about that? So,
That's awesome.
But there's just so much money behind it. And then she adds that part in, and then it's like, you have to understand. I mean, how can people not get that this is money driven?
Exactly. I mean, that really is what it is, because physicians have been trained in this model, and now this is using BMI to diagnose people or talking to people about their weight after a certain body size has really been sort of codified into our health policy and into the policies at hospitals. And it really does reduce the amount of time that doctors have to spend thinking about a person's individual condition.
Right.
And it's like this sort of blanket thing of like, okay, if you're this size, you're supposed to do this. That's the solution across the board. Even though, of course, it misses like, people might be going in for strep throat or something that has nothing to do with weight, and then be getting this prescription of weight loss that is not helping them.
And then the shame that happens to people is so bad that then people will stop going to the doctor. And we have a friend family friend on my husband's side, that she wouldn't go, and she ended up having cancer that didn't get diagnosed until it was really far along. And it's because, and then someone else in the family is saying, she should have been going to the doctor. And I said, and this is a person that I have been watching yo-yo diet forever. And it's so hard. It's so hard to watch this family of women just dieting so much. And it just breaks my heart, because it's useless, number one. And then for them not to see their value all these years, and then to be blamed for not going to the doctor. And why would anybody want to go to the doctor if they're going to get shamed?
Right. And then blaming them for not going, it's like piling shame on top of shame on top of shame.
Right.
And it's funny to me how there's just this insistence that weight loss will fix everything in spite of so much evidence to the contrary.
Right.
And that people are, through no fault of their own, but we all sort of buy into this. This is the default in our culture that, most people are raised in. And so, of course, you're going to do what the doctor says, trust that is supposed to be how it's supposed to be. And then when your body does something different, blame your body and feel like it's wrong.
Right. And this is why, so our first competency, Reclaim Health, is all about, I am the expert of my own body. That doesn't mean I don't listen to people who have knowledge. But then I take it in and I say, how does this work for me? Does that, if my doctor, I mean, first of all, I just keep moving from doctor to doctor until I get ones that tell me, are in alignment with my philosophy about living in my body. But then if someone says you should do this, I'm like, well, let me try that out and see how that goes. No, that doesn't work for me. I know my body.
Yeah.
And we have to really listen. And I am the expert. And the other thing that I try and tell people is doctors work for us. They get paid because we come to them. They are not all powerful. They have information that we don't have, but they don't own our bodies, and we own our bodies. And so I'm paying somebody to get information. So it's on my terms. That's how I see it. It has to be on my terms. And if they're not willing to do that, then I'm going to go find somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an empowering stance. And it's true, they do work for us. They're service providers. And same with therapists too. I mean, I've heard people say that the first therapist they went to said something triggering or wasn't getting it or, shamed them or whatever. And that sucks. That's super unfortunate that happens, and it shouldn't happen. But that's kind of the reality in our culture right now, is that there are going to be healthcare providers of all stripes who just aren't going to get it. And there are also many who do. So you can keep trying and, look for one who really gets it. The same way, like if you had a plumber come to your house to fix your pipes and like not get how your pipes worked, right, you would go find another plumber and, keep trying until you found one, right?
Right. And we have to remember that even those who are the experts, quote unquote experts, so many people are caught up in this belief system and haven't been taught. And there's I don't know if now, but I know when Elizabeth, my colleague, was getting her master's in social work, there was no information at all on eating disorders at all. And so she came out and then started having people come to her with eating disorders, and then had to seek out the experts. She found the Women's Therapy Center Institute in New York City and the women there, Carol Bloom and the others, who were doing beautiful work on eating disorders from a feminist perspective. And so that's where she got her initial training around eating disorders. So she had to go seek it out because it wasn't there. And so we have to remember that most therapists are not getting this training.
Totally.
And probably a lot of dietitians are going into the field from the perspective of perhaps having had an eating problem.
Exactly.
And haven't healed. And so where do we go from there? I mean, that's another issue. So we have to be very aware of our healthcare providers and our mental health care providers.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, when I first started when I first started doing my training to become a dietitian, I was motivated partly by the unhealed parts of myself, thinking like, oh, I'll finally get it together with food. I'll fix, these lingering food issues that I have, and maybe I'll lose weight. That was the sort of immediate motivation was more practical, but there was definitely that in the back of my mind of like, oh, this is going to fix me too. And then through that lens, of course, you go into a dietetics program and it's all about calories and numbers and teaching people this weight loss model. So I, of course, bought that for a while,
right.
And
right.
You have to unlearn, you have to start seeking out alternative viewpoints and sources to be able to sort of heal from that and move into a more health at every size, intuitive eating, body positive model.
How did you get to health at every size? I'm curious. How did you find it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I when I was doing my training, I was in the final stages of my recovery from my eating disorder. And somewhere along the way, I don't know where, but I stumbled on the book Intuitive Eating. It might have been a footnote in some class or a fellow student told me about it or something, but I got the book and I read it. So I kind of immediately, I was sort of resistant to it at first, but it clicked at a certain point because it was how I grew up eating. I did also have an intuitive relationship with food as a kid and even through my adolescence. It wasn't until college that I developed an eating disorder. So I kind of got it and it made sense to me. And then I guess from having sort of healed my own, and I also was working with a therapist and working a lot on mindfulness and self-compassion and things like that, that really tied in very nicely with intuitive eating and sort of laid the groundwork for it. So I kind of had my own personal experience of recovery in my back pocket. And then I started working with these city agencies and doing these nutrition education workshops and stuff in different communities. And I was seeing people who were the top of the class. There were like the participants who came every single week, and they'd come up to me after and be like, check out what I'm doing. Here's my eating and exercise for the week kind of thing. And I just was very struck by how those folks seemed to be similar to how I was in my eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was some zeal about it that was very reminiscent of how I used to be in my relationship with food. And I was starting to develop a different relationship with food. And I was kind of like, I don't know if that's right. But, these were people in larger bodies who society told, and, even my organization was telling, like, you should be smaller. And so it really planted a seed of doubt for me. And then I started the podcast when I was working in one of these jobs and had this sort of missing piece in my career of like talking to people about their relationships with food. And that was one of the main reasons I started the podcast, was I wanted to be able to connect with people about this stuff. And through that, I had a lot of listeners writing in saying that they were finding the podcast helpful in recovering from eating disorders. And that sort of awoke me to like, oh, right, this is a sort of area of specialty that maybe I should get some training in, maybe I should explore and work in, because this is kind of where my heart is. So I started working in eating disorders and then went to conferences and did trainings. And it just became very clear that health at every size was really the paradigm that was facilitating people's recovery that we needed to shift into if we were going to help facilitate recovery. And it sort of squared with my own experience, both of my own recovery and also kind of seeing these people who I was like, oh man, this is getting really disordered seeming. But yeah, this person's in a larger body. So why is this happening? And Health at Every Size kind of had an answer to that.
That's so great. I'm so happy. These are the stories that make me really, really happy. And I hear them. When I hear them, I just get so excited, especially in the dietetics community. It's going to make a huge difference in how people are treated, especially people living in large bodies. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot. And I think that's part of why I do this podcast as well, is to educate fellow healthcare providers and health and wellness professionals who are doing this work. And I've had a lot of them write into me, and I've had clients who are health and wellness professionals come see me for disordered eating. And so I know that it's really a big issue in our community that, we need to get a handle on this. We need to give people who are working in the health and wellness field support and training so that they can recover themselves and also recognize the signs in people they're treating.
Absolutely. So important. Yeah, we just did a 2-day training for professionals in Berkeley. And we had many dietitians there, which was great. And a lot of therapists, and then also yoga teachers and trainers, and just this really great group of people and what I get excited about is they're doing their work, and then they're out in the world, and just the ripple effect of that, they're going to be reaching so many people. And yeah, just if we can keep giving the message. And there's so many more people now than when Elizabeth and I started this work. I mean, the world is really open now, is what I see, because knowing the mothers of the Health at Every Size movement and some of them, just being on the front lines for so long and battling really, and did such amazing work. And to see where we are now, we have a long way to go. And yet there has been progress. So it makes me really happy.
There really has. I mean, I wouldn't be here doing this work if it weren't for you and your colleagues, who founded the Health at Every Size field. So it's like, we really owe you a debt of gratitude, and we need to keep spreading this further and further.
It's been quite a journey.
Well, tell us more about your work, speaking of it, and where people can learn more and sign up for your programs or find out what you do.
So we are really a training institute. As I said earlier on, that we used to just train student leaders. We still do that. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about that's coming up is that we have a leadership summit on August 4th through 6th. And it's for high school and college students, and then staff who work with middle school, high school, and college students. And so we have a lot of high school teams. They'll come with staff and students, and same with college teams. And they come and they learn how to bring the body positive back to their campus. They get our research-based curriculum. We have amazing research that's come out of Stanford University and Cornell University this year. The Cornell piece is just like in the final stages of, we've seen preliminary reports, and it's really beautiful what's happening in their programs. So our participants get to take that curriculum home, and then we support them in their work to just really change their environments. So we have some parents coming to that too. So it can be activists, anybody really who's working with middle school through college students. And then the professional training that we just did is one where people can come and they work with all ages. And so they can just take our work in whatever age group they're working with and take it back to their practices or their communities. So we do that. The other thing that's exciting about our leadership training is with our second day of it, we have a lot of amazing guest speakers coming. We have Sonia Renee Taylor from The Body Is Not an Apology. We have Gloria Lucas. I saw that she had done a podcast with you. We have Virgie Tovar, and we're doing a whole day that's really around diversity, around body image. And I'm really excited about that. We have Andre Savage, who is a martial arts person who does a lot of work around self-protection. And my daughter's going to be there, and Elizabeth's daughter, and they're going to be presenting too. So it's going to be a really rich, exciting 3 days.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
I want to go.
Excited. I'm excited. Tired as I am from the one we just did. I can't wait for August. It's going to be so great. So then we have the book Embody, Learning to Love Your Unique Body and Quiet That Critical Voice. That's a book I wrote to really bring our work to the public and to share my story and the story of many people who have been involved in the work and bring the competencies to life. And what I love about the book too is it has the practices in it. So people can do their own work, or they can, a lot of people are doing reading groups. I heard from a personal coach who came to our training that she's been having people read the book and then they do the practices together. A lot of dietitians and therapists are doing the same thing. They have their clients read it and then they discuss and work together with that content. We have one online course, Body Positive Psychotherapy, which introduces people to how Elizabeth uses our model in her private therapy practice with people with eating disorders. So people read the book and then they do the videos and the readings and can get continuing education. Master's level therapists can get continuing education, and dietitians can get continuing education from our work. And then our exciting news is that we will be, in the next year, we're going to be moving our trainings online. So hopefully we will have some offerings for people who can't get to us. Although we did have people come from Australia to this last training. We had someone from Canada and Guatemala. So it's pretty exciting. But we're hoping to really be able to reach people who can't get to us.
Oh, I love it. What's your website so people can find you?
Okay. And so this is where having the whole body positive movement gets a little confusing. So we are the body positive. So thebodypositive.org is how you can find us.
Awesome. Yeah. The original.
The original. Yeah. Really. So we're on Instagram at The Body Positive, same Twitter at The Body Positive, and then on Facebook, The Body Positive with space between the words.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll put links to all of that in the show notes too, so people can find it.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Connie. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Take care.
So that's our show. Thanks so much to our guest, Connie Sobczak, for sharing her story. And thanks to you for listening. And you can get full show notes for this episode, including all the resources we mentioned here, at christyharrison.com/108. Come join us on Facebook at the Food Psych Podcast Listener Crew, which you can find at christyharrison.com/community. And you can connect there with fellow listeners from around the world and get support for healing your relationship with food. We're brought to you today by The Venture, a new branded podcast from Virgin Atlantic and Gimlet Creative. The Venture is all about the real adventures behind pioneering businesses, from the people who lived them. There's an episode about The Onion, The Real World, and the famous Los Angeles restaurant En Naka, whose head chef and owner cooks a style of Japanese cooking called kaiseki, which is extremely intricate and detailed. She's possibly the only female kaiseki chef in the United States, and she's truly a visionary in her field. Listen to, subscribe, and download The Venture wherever you get your podcasts. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no